In 2008, a man with no farming experience spent £6 million on 1,000 acres of Oxfordshire mud. Everyone told him he'd lost his mind, but that mistake is now worth over £200 million. Here's the strange part. He didn't get rich by farming well. He got rich by failing at it, on camera, for 6 years straight, and the council spent 6 years trying to stop him. Every refusal, it turns out, made him richer. So let's go inside it, because what's hidden at Diddley Squat isn't a farm at all. Let's start where it began. Not with the television show, not with the beer, with the land itself, and a decision that, on paper, made no sense at all. In 2008, Jeremy Clarkson bought roughly 1,000 acres near Chadlington in the Cotswolds for around £6 million. At the time, this was regarded, by anyone who thought about it seriously, as a curious use of money. He wasn't a farmer. He had no agricultural background beyond, presumably, driving fast cars past the occasional field. The land came with tenant farmers already working it, and Clarkson, by his own admission, understood almost nothing about what he'd bought. But look at the year, 2008. The financial crisis was tearing through every conventional asset class in the country. Banks were collapsing. Pension funds were evaporating. The clever money, the sophisticated money, the money that read the Financial Times over breakfast, was fleeing into whatever safe haven it could find, and mostly finding there wasn't one. Clarkson went the other way entirely. He put his money into English soil. And here's the thing the old families of this country have understood for centuries, quietly, without ever needing to explain it to anyone. Land doesn't crash to zero. It doesn't get delisted. No regulator can freeze it. No hedge fund can short it into oblivion overnight. An acre of English farmland, whatever else happens to the economy around it, simply sits there, appreciating, generation after generation. It is the oldest wealth preservation trick in the aristocratic playbook, and Clarkson, the son of a Paddington Bear salesman from Doncaster no less, arrived at precisely the same conclusion through an entirely different route. By the time the cameras started rolling on what would become Clarkson's farm, that £6 million purchase was already worth considerably more. Today, conservative valuations put the land alone at somewhere north of £45 million. That's before a single business built on top of it gets counted. He more than doubled his money simply by owning the ground beneath his Wellington boots. But here's where most rich men would have stopped. Buy the land, let it appreciate, collect the rent from the tenant farmers, and go back to filming cars for a living. That would have been the sensible, unremarkable, faintly boring outcome. Clarkson did something else instead. When the tenancy on the land expired, he decided, against every piece of advice he was given, to farm it himself. And that decision, more than any other single moment in this entire story, is the one that turned a shrewd land purchase into something worth hundreds of millions. Here is the detail that the farming establishment simply couldn't get their heads around, and in some cases still can't. In his first year of actually farming the land himself, Clarkson made a profit of £144, not 144,000, £144 on 1,000 acres, after a full year of ploughing, sowing, harvesting, and enough diesel to power a small navy. By any conventional measure, that is not a business. That is a catastrophe wearing a tweed jacket. And yet, and this is the part that took the entire television and agricultural industry roughly 2 years to understand, that catastrophe was the single most valuable thing Clarkson ever produced. Because Amazon Prime had commissioned a show about it, and what Amazon discovered, almost by accident, was that watching a famous, wealthy, opinionated man fail spectacularly at something genuinely difficult was more compelling television than watching him succeed at anything. The failure was the product. Every snapped fan belt, every crop ruined by weather he hadn't anticipated, every increasingly heated exchange with his long-suffering farm manager Caleb Cooper. All of it was real. Nobody scripted the rain. Nobody scripted the combine harvester breaking down at exactly the wrong moment. And audiences, who are considerably sharper than the industry sometimes gives them credit for, can tell the difference between manufactured drama and the genuine article within about 4 seconds of it appearing on their screen. Clarkson's Farm became Prime Video's most watched original series in the UK. Millions of viewers in dozens of countries tuning in to watch a man in a Lamborghini tractor lose money in increasingly inventive ways. Farming experts, people with every professional reason to view a celebrity dabbling in their trade with suspicion, instead gave him an award for raising public awareness of British agriculture, because he'd achieved more for the profile of English farming in a handful of episodes than 3 decades of worthy countryside documentaries had managed between them. And here's the financial architecture nobody in the industry saw coming. The farm itself might barely break even. But the show about the farm is where the real money sits. Every disaster that costs Clarkson money in the field earns him considerably more in television rights. It is, without exaggeration, the most counterintuitive business model British broadcasting has produced in a generation, and it works with remarkable, repeatable consistency, series after series. The £144 wasn't a failure at all. It was the moment the entire enterprise began to turn. Now, before the beer, before the pub, there was a shed, quite literally a shed, with some surplus potatoes in it, and a hand-painted sign leaning against the door. This was Diddley Squat Farm Shop, and it began as nothing more than a way to shift the vegetables Clarkson couldn't otherwise sell. Within weeks of the first series airing, that shed had a queue. Not a modest one either. A queue that grew so long, so quickly, that local police had to be brought in to manage 3-mile tailbacks on country lanes that hadn't seen that kind of chaos since the war. By any sensible retail logic, none of this should have worked. The produce is priced well above supermarket rates. The council imposed a planning condition limiting the shop's range to whatever could be sourced within 16 miles, which sounds on paper like a punishing restriction. Clarkson's partner, Lisa Hogan, later admitted it was one of the best things that ever happened to the business, because it forced them to discover local suppliers they'd otherwise never have found. The opening hours are erratic. The parking is, generously, inadequate. Within a single year, the farm shop went from £44,000 in assets to over £1.3 million. That isn't a hobby turning a modest profit. That's a business being born. In real time, in a muddy field, in front of an audience that couldn't get enough of it. Because what people were actually queuing for was never the honey, or the cow juice, or the bee juice, Clarkson's cheerfully cheeky renaming of milk and honey. They were queuing for participation, for the chance to stand in the exact field they'd watched on their television screens and feel, for a moment, connected to something that felt genuinely honest in a world that had largely stopped bothering to be. A jar of honey at twice the supermarket price is an entirely reasonable toll to pay for that feeling, and the queues, week after week, prove it. Meanwhile, West Oxfordshire District Council continued to say no. No to the car park, no to the restaurant, which they eventually shut down with an enforcement notice. No to expansion after expansion, citing the area of outstanding natural beauty and the impact of commercial activity on a quiet rural setting. What the council took years to grasp, and some of them still haven't, is that every single refusal was in effect another episode. Every enforcement notice was a storyline handed to them free of charge. Every planning inspector's report became drama, watched by millions, which drove more visitors to the very operation they were trying to restrain. Clarkson himself later revealed that a farming friend had suggested he actually apply for planning permission, specifically because losing would make brilliant television. The council believed they held all the leverage. In practice, they were unpaid co-writers on one of the most successful shows in British broadcasting, making the farm more famous with every objection they raised. If you want to understand just how deliberate all of this really is, look at the pub. Because the pub is the one piece of the empire where Clarkson isn't even pretending to chase a profit. And that, it turns out, is precisely the point. Clarkson spent around £1 million buying and renovating the farmer's dog, a pub tucked a few miles from the farm, and he attached to it one rule that governed absolutely everything. Nothing on the menu could come from anywhere but Britain. Not the meat, not the vegetables, not the condiments sitting quietly on the table that most diners would never think twice about. That sounds simple enough as a sentence. It is anything but simple as a business plan. British black pepper instead of the imported variety that every other kitchen in the country uses without a second thought. And British pepper, as it happens, costs a genuine fortune compared to the alternative. British beef instead of anything shipped in from abroad. British cheese, British cider, British everything, sourced from suppliers who are, more often than not, considerably more expensive and considerably less convenient than the usual wholesale channels every other pub in Oxfordshire relies on without comment. Any sensible restaurant consultant looking at those numbers would have told Clarkson to relax the rule within 6 months. He didn't relax it. He doubled down on it. publicly, on camera, and let viewers watch exactly what that commitment cost him in real pounds and pence. The pub now employs 146 people in a stretch of Oxfordshire countryside where rural employment isn't something you can take for granted. And it struggles, quite deliberately, to turn any meaningful profit at all. Margins are thin. Some months, by Clarkson's own admission, they're barely there. This is the detail that separates his approach from almost every other celebrity venture currently occupying shelf space and menu boards across the country. Most famous names attach themselves to a product, take their percentage, and let someone else worry about the messy, expensive, unglamorous parts of actually running the thing properly. Clarkson has done the opposite at every single turn, choosing again and again the more expensive, more complicated, more genuinely British option, because he understood something the hospitality industry hadn't quite priced into their spreadsheets. Authenticity, real authenticity, the sort that costs you money in the short term rather than making you any, is exactly what audiences have been starving for. It's exactly what they'll drive an hour out of their way for, queue in the rain for, and happily pay a premium for once they're sitting at the table. A pub that loses money because every single ingredient is genuinely, verifiably British isn't a failing business. It's a piece of theatre that happens to also serve a very good Sunday roast. The pub isn't a mistake, in other words. It's a statement, made in bricks, staff wages, and overpriced pepper. And statements, however unfashionable this sounds to an accountant, turn out to be extraordinarily good for business, just rarely in the way the accountant would have preferred to see it explained to them. Before we get to the brewery, which is where this entire story properly changes gear, if you've been enjoying this one so far, this would be a very good moment to hit subscribe and tap that notification bell. There's a great deal more of this coming, and you'll want to be here for it. And if you've ever visited Diddley Squat yourself or fancied it, do drop it in the comments below. We'd genuinely love to hear what you made of it. In Series 2, almost as an aside, Clarkson grew some barley on the farm and decided to make a beer out of it. Nobody in the drinks industry so much as looked up. And on paper, that indifference made perfect sense. Celebrity drinks brands follow an extremely well-worn pattern, one that every executive in the sector could recite from memory. Famous person lends their face and their name to an existing drinks company. That company handles the brewing, the distribution, the shelf negotiations, all the unglamorous machinery that actually makes a product exist in the real world. The famous person turns up to the launch party, poses for photographs, collects a licensing fee, and everybody quietly moves on. It's a licensing arrangement dressed up in the language of entrepreneurship, and the industry has an entire playbook for managing it. Let the brand generate a bit of noise, then buy it outright and fold it into the existing machine before it becomes any real trouble. Hawkston Lager did not follow that pattern, and that single deviation from the script is precisely why nobody in brewing saw what was actually coming until it had already arrived. Clarkson built a real brewery, real fermentation tanks, real brewers with real careers behind them, a real supply chain running through Oxfordshire and neighbouring Gloucestershire, sourcing barley not from whichever supplier happened to be cheapest that quarter, but from his own farm and the farms around it. Farmers who, for the first time in a good many years, had a guaranteed buyer at a fair, agreed price rather than being left entirely at the mercy of commodity markets that had never once cared whether they survived the winter. By 2025, Hawkstone had posted sales of over £21 million, nearly tripling the previous year's figures, 134% annual growth, which made it officially the 23rd fastest growing private company in the entire country. Not the fastest growing drinks brand, the fastest growing private company, full stop, ahead of businesses, in sectors with none of the seasonal chaos or planning battles or televised tractor breakdowns that Hawkston has had to contend with along the way. It's now stocked in Waitrose, Sainsbury's and Morrison's and poured in more than 2,000 pubs across the country. The brewery itself employs 53 people and has physically expanded 3 separate times in just 4 years, each expansion, notably, funded by the previous year's growth rather than outside investment, which, in an industry addicted to venture capital, is almost quaintly old-fashioned. Its own valuation has climbed to £75 million, a figure entirely separate from the farm's £45 million. 2 distinct businesses, sitting on the same land, each one quietly making the other more valuable, rather than competing for the same slice of attention. Then there's the advertising campaign. Farmers filmed with obvious relish, rather enthusiastically endorsing the product's quality in language considerably more colourful than the Advertising Standards Authority was ever going to tolerate. The ban landed exactly as predictably as everyone should have expected. What nobody predicted was that the banned advert would then be watched by over 1 million people online within days, shared precisely because it had been forbidden. The ban was, by almost any honest assessment, the finest piece of marketing the brand could possibly have received free of charge. And one rather suspects Clarkson understood exactly that outcome the moment he signed off on the script. But here is the detail that genuinely separates Hawkston from every other celebrity name currently sitting on a supermarket shelf, and the one the rest of the industry still hasn't fully reckoned with. Reportedly, Carlsberg made a private approach with an acquisition offer somewhere in the region of £50 million. Clarkson turned it down within 24 hours, without by most accounts a great deal of agonising over the decision. Because without the local barley, without the transparent Oxfordshire supply chain, without the specific farmers who now depend on that contract for their own livelihoods, Hawkston is simply another lager competing for fridge space. There is no version of this brand that survives being unbundled from the farm that grows its ingredients and the television show that tells its story. The business model isn't attached to the brand as a marketing flourish. The business model is the brand, in its entirety. You cannot buy one half of it without destroying the other, which is precisely why nobody has managed to buy it at all. The farm grows the barley, the brewery makes the beer. The television show advertises both, at no cost whatsoever, to millions of viewers who chose to watch entirely of their own accord. The farm shop sells both, at a premium, to visitors who'll happily queue for hours for the privilege of taking a bottle home. Every single part of it reinforces every other part, quietly, continuously, without needing a marketing department to engineer any of it. It isn't a farm anymore, not really. It's a flywheel, spinning on its own momentum. And the brewing industry, the farming industry, the retail industry, all of them are still trying to work out how you'd even begin to build one of their own. Let's go back for a moment to that 1,000 acres of Oxfordshire mud and the £6 million and the friends who genuinely thought Jeremy Clarkson had lost his mind. What none of them could see, because it hadn't happened yet, because it couldn't have been planned, only stumbled into, was that the land was never really a farm at all. It was a stage, a foundation for something that would eventually span television, brewing, retail and hospitality, each part quietly funding and amplifying the others, until the whole thing became worth considerably more than the sum of its very muddy parts. The television show made the farm shop viable, the farm shop built the brand launched the brewery funded the pub generated more content, the content drove more visitors, the visitors bought more beer, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, £144 of first-year profit stopped being an embarrassment and became, in hindsight, the exact moment the flywheel started turning. The council thought they held the leverage. They were, in fact, providing the plot. The brewing industry thought a celebrity playing at their trade posed no threat. He built something they can't buy their way into. The farming establishment thought a television presenter would make them look foolish. Instead, he made an entire nation stop and think, seriously, about where their food actually comes from. Probably for the first time in their lives, what Clarkson has actually built, measured properly, isn't revenue at all. It's hundreds of jobs in a rural community that had been quietly losing them for years. It's a guaranteed market for barley farmers who'd never had one before. It's proof, more persuasive than any government rural strategy paper could ever hope to be, that people will drive an unreasonable distance for something they genuinely believe in. And somewhere in Oxfordshire, right now, a man in a wax jacket is very probably shouting at something that's broken in an interesting way, while a camera, quietly, keeps rolling. There's a line Clarkson once wrote in The Times that has rather stuck with me. He said that land is a better investment than any bank can offer you, that the government doesn't get a penny of it when you die, and that the price of food can only ever go up. He was right on every count. But what he didn't write, and perhaps didn't fully know yet, was that the land would go on to become the stage for something nobody could have planned. Something built only from stubbornness, and a great deal of camera time, and enough genuine, unpolished chaos to make an entire country stop what it was doing and watch. That's the real story here. Not the investment, not the brewery, remarkable as it is, not even the shop with the impossible queues. The real story is that a man bought a field, made every mistake it was possible to make in it, refused to be embarrassed by a single one of them, and in doing so reminded the whole country why the English countryside still matters. If you've enjoyed this one, do hit subscribe and tap that notification bell. We've got a great deal more of this to come, and you really won't want to miss it. And we'd love to know, in the comments, have you ever been to Diddley Squat yourself? And if you have, was the queue worth it? Thank you, as always, for watching. We'll see you in the next one.